Okay, in this topic, we're going to be getting into the third kingdom for our six kingdoms is going to be Protists. Remember, so far we've talked about the two bacterial kingdoms. Now we're going to get into our Protist kingdom. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of the basic characteristics and examples. The kingdom Protista is very unique in the sense that it's kind of like a catch-all. Right? There are certain organisms that are similar to plants, but they're not actually plants. And there's certain organisms that are similar to fungi, but they're not actually a fungus. And then there are also certain organisms that are very similar to animals, however, they're not going to be considered animals. And so we have this kingdom that's going to be kind of a catch-all for this group of organisms that have similar characteristics to some of the other kingdoms, but they don't actually fit. All right, so this is where our Protista kingdom comes into play. Protists are going to be microscopic. Most of them are going to probably be unicellular or single-celled. Okay. However, there are going to be some that can be multicellular. We define the organisms that we put into the Protista kingdom by their structural characteristics and by the fact that there are going to be parts of them that don't fit, they can't be defined by some of the other kingdoms. But like I said, they are going to be unicellular for the most part, not all of them, but most of them will be. Most of them will be single-celled, but there will be a few that are going to be multi-celled. So let's look at some of these. Here are the ways that our protists can obtain nutrition. Okay, they can be heterotrophs. There aren't any that are going to be necessarily just heterotroph or just another version, but you do have those groups that will be heterotrophs. You can have some that are going to be considered what we call photoautotrophs, which means they will only go through, they can obtain their energy by the use of chloroplasts. So there are some protists that contain chloroplasts, so they're going to be considered photoautotrophs. And then this third type is going to be mixotrophs, which means, like I mentioned earlier, you can have some that would do both. They can get some of their nutrition through obtaining it by consuming other sources, or they still have chloroplasts that allow them to go through photosynthesis if they need to. So you have these three options for ways that the different protists can obtain nutrition. Now let's look at the protists based on what similarities they are most like. Okay, they can be divided into three categories based on who they're more closely similar to. You can have animal-like protists that ingest food or ingest particles for food or for nourishment, and those would be protozoa. You can have algae, which would be our plant-like protists that are going to be photosynthetic. And you can have fungus-like protists that are going to absorb nutrients, possibly through filaments, to get their nutrition. So these are the three major categories of our protists. You have animal-like protists, like in the protozoa. You have plant-like protists that have chloroplasts, like algae, and then you have fungus-like protists. Alright, so let's look at our protozoa or our animal-like protists first. They're unicellular, so they're single-celled. Here's a microscopic picture that we have of a protozoa. Okay, and just looking at the picture, you can see some structural characteristics. You can see this membrane that it has. You can see these little hair-like extensions that surround it. Those would be its cilia, and then there's some unique organelles for the protozoa that we can see within the inside of the organism. So let's look at these different protozoans. Many of our protozoans, our animal-like protists, are grouped according to how they move. Okay, so many of our animal-like protists, which are our protozoans, they're grouped by how they can move. Um, some of them move and they also feed or ingest food particles by sending out extensions of their cell membrane. So it's kind of like um, if you've ever played with silly putty or um, a gel-like substance, and part of it can be stretched out, kind of like an arm. Well, there are certain animal-like protists, these protozoans, that have this ability to extend part of their cell membrane, kind of like an arm extension, and they can use that to wrap around their food and engulf their food. They can use that to reach out and grab onto a surface or substrate and then pull themselves forward. So this is one type of movement process for our protozoans. These extensions of the cell membrane, these arms that can extend out, are going to be called pseudopodia. Okay, so pseudopods or pseudopodia is what these arm-like extensions are going to be. Um, and then other protozoans can use cilia or flagella, like the picture in the previous slide. I labeled those cilia that we could see. But if you look at this picture, all right, here is a protozoan, an animal-like protist, and you can see these arm-like extensions, okay, that are going to be the pseudopods. Here is one here. You can see them branching off in different places around the protist. So those would be the pseudopodia or the pseudopods, these little arm-like extensions of the cell membrane. All right, now our protozoans, our animal-like protists, can be broken down even further into four main groups. We can have amoebas, which is a type of protozoan, an animal-like protist. We can have flagellates, ciliates, and sporozoans. So here, picture of amoeba, a picture of your flagellates, because they have flagella or tails that allow them to move. Here would be a ciliate. All right, so you can see the cilia, the hair-like extensions. So those are some examples. Those are the four main groups as well of your animal-like protists. All right, let's look at some of these animal-like protists. You have your amoebas. They're kind of just like a blob. They really don't have a definite shape. They do have these pseudopods, okay, these arm-like extensions that we talked about. And it can change its shape as it moves because there is no definite shape. So maybe one part would stretch in one direction for a while as it moves, but then if it wants to change direction, it doesn't have to turn around. It would just start stretching in the other direction. And you can see in these pictures how the pseudopods are stretching out and engulfing food particles that it's going to take in. Amoebas, which are those that we just looked at, most of them are going to be found in salt water. However, there are some freshwater amoebas that can be found in ponds, mossy areas, maybe even small lakes. Okay, so you can find freshwater amoebas, but most of them are going to be found in salt water. Freshwater amoebas are going to be in a hypotonic environment because they don't have, their bodies aren't used to the absence of salts. They're constantly going to be taking in water. So water is constantly going to be moving inside the amoeba. As a result of this, the amoebas found in freshwater have structures or organelles inside of them called contractile vacuoles, and what they are is they're just water pumps. And as the amoeba takes on water, if it's a freshwater amoeba, its water pump, this contractile vacuole, is going to constantly be pumping it out any excess water it doesn't need to make sure there's a balance with the amount of water inside that freshwater amoeba compared to the amount of water outside of it. Okay, as far as the amoebas go, like I mentioned, there mostly are going to be saltwater amoebas or these marine amoebas. And of these saltwater or marine amoebas, you have two groups. You have the foraminiferians and you have the radiolarians, and they have shells. So here's a picture of the foraminiferians and then the radiolarians, and they do have shells, these saltwater amoebas. So those were the amoebas. That's one group of our animal-like protists, the protozoans. Let's look at the flagellates. Okay, the flagellates, these protozoans have flagella. The flagella are going to aid in movement. Okay, these little tails, and the tails are going to whip back and forth quickly, and it propels them, it moves them in the direction they want to go. That's the main reason that they have those flagella, and that's why they're grouped into this particular category. So these particular animal-like protists, okay, these flagellates are going to have tails to help them move or swim within a water environment. Some of these flagellates can be parasitic and cause diseases, but there are quite a bit that are going to be helpful. Now the ciliates, this category of protozoans, they're going to use cilia, not flagella, for movement. Okay, so this one over here on the right side is an example of a paramecium. Now our ciliates can live in any kind of aquatic habitat. Ponds, streams, rivers, lakes, even into oceans. Okay, you can find them commonly in freshwater, but you can also find them in saltwater as well. Now the paramecia, this particular ciliate, they're going to contain a lot of different types of organelles that help carry out specific functions. Alright, so as far as some of these major organelles found within the paramecium, okay, obviously we talked about the cilia, these hair-like structures that aid in movement, but it also has this gullet, this opening, almost like a mouth opening, that the cilia can funnel food particles into, and this is how food gets into the paramecium, and this is where it'll go through the digesting of it and removing of nutrients from it. So that would be the gullet. Here, this pore is where waste is going to be expelled. So any type of waste that the paramecium builds up can be expelled through that area. We already talked about contractile vacuoles. Since it is going to be found in freshwater, this vacuole will be like a water pump to make sure that the water balance of water stays the same or stays in equilibrium with its outside environment. And then it does have two nuclei. Okay, this micronucleus, the smaller one, is going to aid in the reproductive processes of the paramecium, whereas the macronucleus, the larger one, is going to function as the nucleus that maintains or handles everyday functions, not reproductive, just everyday normal processes. So those are some of the major organelles that could be found in this particular protozoan. Now, the paramecium also have the ability to undergo a form of conjugation. Remember, we've talked about conjugation before, but if their environmental conditions change or lack of food or food is lacking, okay, in a particular situation, they can go through this process. And what they're going to do is they're going to, remember, through conjugation, they're going to join together through a protein bridge, and they're going to swap genetic material that will help increase their chances of adapting to their changing environment. And then your sporozoans are going to be more parasitic. Okay, they're going to act. These animal-like protists are going to produce spores through their reproductive processes. They are all parasites, the sporozoans. They live within an organism, okay? And a plasmodium is a common type of sporozoan, and it causes the disease malaria.